So here I am on the Ohio River, or for my explanation today will be as close as I can get to what evolutionists like to pretend is the early proto-Earth environment, where somehow an environment something like this, where you have water, some of them would say an ocean is better, but I'm in Ohio, I'm kind of far from the ocean, so I'll just have to use the riverbank instead as the best suitable substitutes. But some evolutionists would say that it started in the ocean or started in a mud puddle somewhere, water splashing on the sand, splashing, creating life all by itself. Now, I figure this river is thousands of miles long from Pennsylvania all the way down that way to Louisiana. If you follow it far enough to the Gulf of Mexico, dumps into the Mississippi, and the Mississippi goes to the Gulf of Mexico. So these little waves are constantly all day long along both shores, splashing against the sand. Hi, JR. And according to evolutionists, millions of years ago, an action just like this is somehow creating life, spontaneous generation. You can hear the waves coming in from the boat that just went by. Takes that long for it to get from the middle to here. By the way, that island right there that you see has an interesting history. Aaron Burr went to that island, and so did one of the kings of France. And a whole lot of other famous people have been on that island. I'm sure George Washington too, because he came through here as well. But there's a list of all the famous people on that island. It's a very interesting history. It's called Blennerhassett Island. Anyway, so according to them, millions of years ago, the water splashing on sand, just like this, somehow created life. There's more mud than sand here in this area, as you can see. Probably about 50% goose poop at this point. So, despite the fact that we have today thousands of miles in just this river, combined with thousands of miles of every other river, every ocean on the planet splashing on the sand, every lake of Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes, the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, all those seashores, all that water splashing on the sand, beating against the rocks. And yet today, with all that continual action, there's no life being created anywhere. Yet, according to evolutionists, billions of years ago, we can blur the lines a little bit, turn our minds into something more akin to a cartoon, where if you watch cartoons, sometimes we think of them as, we can suspend reality a little bit, and things can happen on there that make it more fun to watch. And we can pretend things that don't really happen because characters will suddenly appear, and we don't from one place to another, and we don't think about how they got from one place to another. We never really break it down, and so it suspends our understanding and our disbelief of what's really going on, and we put it together and we just accept it as it is. It's what makes cartoons and fiction very interesting. The same thing's going on with the theory of evolution. The fact is, no life is being created today, so what will happen is we will mystify, we will blur our understanding of history and accept things that aren't really happening in what we observe and see in real life. You see, even though in all these shores, in all these thousands of miles, tens of thousands, millions of miles around the surface of the earth, of seashores and water splashing on the rocks, even with life partially within them, no life is somehow assembling itself and spontaneously generating. It doesn't happen anywhere. So evolutionists will pretend that there was some sort of different atmosphere, or that if we just add enough universes, and this is real evolution theory, I'm not making this up. You know, the reason that in so much in cartoons and science fiction all the time they're always talking about alternate universes is to program you, to make you think that there could be alternate universes. So that automatically comes to mind as something somewhat reasonable. In fact, when you think that evolutionists come and say, well, the math doesn't really work for how chemicals and elements can combine in just one universe, it's so impossible that it can't even happen mathematically in one universe. So what we'll do is we will add unlimited numbers of entire universes. Of course, there's no proof that there's any universes. And they'll say that, well, this is just a theory. In fact, what their theory is they're believing in something. So they're not proving anything, as science would suggest that you would need to do. There's no proof. There's only belief that these unlimited numbers of universes exist in order to make the math tenable, so that you could suppose that even with all this action in the entire universe, that spontaneous generation could somehow occur. Now, these are real people telling you that you're stupid if you think that somebody made it rather than it happened by itself. Because they've literally conceded the fact that it can't happen in one universe, or that it's at least mathematically impossible. And what would really be interesting is if we could, for example, let's say we could be like Ray Palmer in the Marvel universe, and we could, you know, Captain Atom, that's his code name, you know. I mean, his code name's Captain Atom, but his secret identity is Palmer. So let's pretend like we're Ray Palmer for a second, and we could shrink down to the size of a cell. Then shrink down a little further so we could go inside the cell membrane and we could look at all the pieces inside the cell for a minute. What would we see? Would we see parts that could just come together and work all by themselves? Now let me explain something. What you would see is no different than, say, this bottle right here that somebody kindly left for us for an example. Somebody drinking vodka down here by the river, or maybe it floated and got left by the river, I don't know. But let's just take this for an example. You see this vodka bottle here? It just sits there because it's just one piece and it can't interact with its environment. And if you went down so small that you could see inside of a cell, you would see a lot of pieces like this that can't just interact on their own with each other. You would see that they would have to be put together carefully in order for them to do the advanced, amazing actions that they do. For example, you would have to see that the ability to create the cell itself, let alone the entire organism, has to be encoded in a plan. Oh, here's a pop bottle. There's a pop bottle and a vodka bottle, but they don't interact with each other. They're just inanimate objects. And a cell, at its fundamental level, if you look at all the little pieces of it, are no different. They're just inanimate objects that were put together in such a way as to function. Just like a car has been put together to function, just like a boat has been put together to function. Otherwise, you just have inanimate objects, just like this. But if we suspend our reality for a minute, we can pretend like something goes on at a microscopic level that can't go on in what you see and observe in real life. And notice that spontaneous generation, once again, has not been observed to happen today, ever. But millions of years ago, at a microscopic level you can't see, you're supposed to pretend that it did happen and could happen. That somehow what doesn't happen today, sorry, dog Dinko here is tangling up on my lap here, or on my leg here. What doesn't happen today, what has never been observed to happen in all of recorded history, what can't happen in a laboratory, somehow happened long ago and far away. That tiny little pieces of inanimate objects, if we just zoom down far enough, somehow it becomes less than or more, I should say, than an inanimate object. But all the pieces of a cell are nothing but conglomerations of inanimate objects. Inanimate objects do not work with each other on their own. No more than this vodka bottle over here is functioning somehow with this Coca-Cola bottle over here, can. They don't come together and form a bigger beer jug or something, you know. They're just sitting there. And without the opposite of entropy, in other words, without planning, without design, they never will come together. They'll never function together unless someone intelligent comes and puts them together, melts them down, and creates something together out of them. Or combines them in such a way, or turns them into a piece of art, or whatever they want to do with it. See, entropy says that these two little pieces, if they sit there forever, will just erode and decay that way. They'll eventually, the bottle will crack, the can will eventually fall apart, and then it'll just deteriorate until it's down into little tiny grains of sand. But evolution would tell you that the grains of sand jumped to life because the waves smashed upon them for millions of years. And they're still doing it today, and it's not happening today, but long ago, far away, in a fictional cartoon world that doesn't exist, has never been observed to exist, can't be proven to exist, because of the mathematical possibility of unlimited numbers of universes, we're expected to somehow believe that sand could just have jumped to life at a microscopic level. All the tiny little pieces, like that can and that jar and a million other pieces, because a cell is vastly more complex than what Charles Darwin told us, or believed a cell to be, because he just thought they were just little bowls of jelly. He didn't know what was in them. Now we know they're composed of millions of little parts all working together. So you wouldn't just need that little bottle there and that can over there. You would need a part over here. Here's some bottles over here, a piece of plastic over here, and this one over here. I'm sure glad people are such litter bugs. It's really great for illustrative purposes. Here's another can. Here's another can. They would all have to come together. And just because we zoom down on them to the microscopic level, it doesn't make them any less inanimate objects. They're not going to come together magically because they're really small. I don't care if you're talking about at an atomic level. They're not going to just come together in a useful, functional way. They'll always come together in a way that releases energy and tends towards entropy. Another interesting theory that they love to put out and tell us is that because the sun is up there, I won't look at it, but let the camera look at it there, that because the sun shines down on the earth, it's adding energy, and consequently it is suspending the forces of entropy. And maybe I'm not using the right word, okay? They might use a different word. But entropy is delayed because of input energy from the sun. Well, that's very interesting if you think about it. So let's put increased energy from the sun on this pop bottle. Well, you look at that. Can you believe that? The sun is already shining on the pop bottle. In fact, the sun is already shining on that piece right there of plastic. The sun is already shining right there. But adding the work of the sun does not organize those parts into something useful, nor can it at a microscopic level. It's no different. You can't just put the sun on something and use the sun as an excuse because it's an energy source to organize it. And there are other energy sources in our universe. If the sun were to disappear, we could say the magnetism of the earth is an energy source that is all around us. We could say gravity is an energy source that's all around us. So why have they chosen the sun? So, well, plants are powered by the sun. So somehow the sun must have triggered something in the early universe in one of the multiverses, and this just happens to be the one where the math fit just right. Now, I don't care how many universes you get. If you shine the sun on an inanimate object, like it's happening right here, right now, before our very eyes, you won't get a different result than what you're seeing right here. Test the theory on yourself. Go out as you are already a living organism and sit in the sun and see if something good happens to you, or if you're more likely to develop cancer because the sun rays are actually causing damage. Oh, that's right. Because see, if you're not built to organize, to metabolize the sun like a plant, the sun is harmful to you. The sun is harmful to inanimate, disorganized objects. The sun will shine on this plastic bowl and it will cause it to fade and deteriorate more quickly and become more brittle. If you go out in the sun, already an advanced, organized system, your body, but unable to metabolize the sun, you also will fall apart by entropy. Entropy is the second law of thermodynamics. In science, it's a law. It's not a suggestion. It's not, it's a fact that all things become more disorganized over time. So there's no possibility of all the sunshine, all the magnetism, all the multiverses in the universe of getting a different result on inanimate objects. And it doesn't matter if we zoom in to the microscopic level and the sun shines on the inanimate objects inside of a cell, it's not going to self-organize. You see, millions and millions of pieces of anything can't come together. There's a word for it that really trips up a lot of the atheists. You know, they say that you can't, then all of a sudden the word just popped out of my mind. It was there a minute ago. When several things have to be codependent on each other, you can't break them down any further. And inside your cell, if any of those objects are missing, your cell dies. So you can't have a bunch of random pieces. No, you have to have them highly organized to begin with to function together. And any force that is not, I have to keep turning around because the dog keeps wrapping himself around me. Silly dog. So you can't have those pieces just working together unless they all work together at the same time. If one of them ceases to work, like whatever reads the DNA cell molecule no longer functions, well, you're not going to have a cell. Because not only is the instructions in the DNA for how to build the organism that the cell is part of, but the instructions for how to build another cell just like it are also inside that DNA. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever put this together in your head? Evolutionists never seem to put it together in their head. You know, most people don't think on their own. They just accept a theory, or they assume that somebody smarter than them knows the answer, but they don't think it through for themselves. So think about how you can't have a bunch of codependent parts unless all of them are functioning at the same time. But you need the instructions to build the part that reads the instructions. Right there inside of a cell. It's not like the cell or something in your body reads the instructions of your DNA and creates your entire body, unless it can also do that for the cell to create more DNA and to create the other parts of the cell. Isn't that interesting? So you have codependent parts all throughout, not just one or two. Let's say, they get this imaginative idea that, all these waves just mixing at a microscopic level. If you zoom it in, they'll come together and they'll function together. Let's say two parts did bump into each other and somehow chemically combined. You still don't have a cell. Because you don't need one or two parts for a cell to function. You need millions and millions of parts to come together. And they can't come together one at a time because the forces of entropy will cause it to fall apart faster than those millions of pieces could ever come together naturally on their own. Think about how long it would take to assemble these millions of pieces of plastic into, a large piece of artwork, for example. Well, if you walk away from it and you don't keep assembling it, it's going to fall apart according to entropy over time. And the same thing in a cell. If you try to assemble these microscopic pieces together, it's going to fall apart before the entire thing can come together and start functioning on its own. So therefore, evolution is entirely impossible. It's an untenable position. It's illogical and improbable, and it doesn't work in a million multiverses. Supposing that all the multiverses have any sort of functionality like our own, but it doesn't matter what the others did. So what we see is that life happens in this universe. And what we see in this universe and what we can measure and what we can record and what we can understand and put together doesn't happen. Things do not spring into life by themselves. I don't care if let's go back to fiction again, because evolution borrows heavily from the DC and Marvel universe, apparently. And I said DC. I said Captain Atom was in Marvel earlier. Yes, he's actually in DC. They do have a shrink guy. Oh, no, I said Ray Palmer. No, that's right. Ray Palmer's Marvel, yeah. But he's not Captain Atom. Captain Atom is DC, I think. Okay. Correct me if I get that wrong. They both have a shrink guy. They copy off each other. Well, let's take the Flash, for example. Because another favorite idea of evolutionists, and an idea in early 1900s, I think it was somewhere around 1920-ish, you can check the date. A guy named Watson and Crick decided to use the Flash theory to create life, okay? Of course, from DC's The Flash that lightning struck him with a bunch of chemicals and they all combined together and zapped him at supersonic speed. But would you believe that that's what evolutionists think happened if you zoom down real tiny? If lightning struck this bottle, that somehow this bottle would automatically combine with millions and 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 millions of other parts to spring to life all by side itself. Well, let's test that theory. Strike yourself with lightning. Okay. Does it go back to being science fiction then? I think it would, real fast, right? Strike anything with lightning and see if it's better because of it. I don't care what force they pretend to use. They can't get around these crazy ideas that they have. Absolute insanity that the world can just spring into life by spontaneous combustion. Or that codependent parts can self-assemble into something that all works at the same time. Millions and millions of pieces inside of a cell. You say, oh, well, there had to have been a proto-simple cell. Okay, well, there's no observable evidence that such a cell ever existed, and the simplest cells known today are not simple. They lie to you about that word. There's no such thing as a simple cell. In fact, cells are very complicated. The most simple one you can find still requires millions and millions of parts, codependently working together. So that's how absurd the atheist evolutionary theory is. Well, you can say, well, and here I'm turning around again, the dog's wrapping himself around me. I think he just walks in circles. So we'll walk down this way a little bit. So what is it that what else can they say? We've covered the sun shining on us, how the sun doesn't really combine anything together, much less millions and millions of parts, not on a macro or a microscopic level. We talked how lightning can't do it. So what other ideas do evolutionists have for how all these parts could just somehow come together? Well, some atheists will say, well, maybe evolution didn't happen. We're just saying we reject your theory of the idea that God did it. Because if we don't know, that doesn't mean God did it automatically. All right. Okay, you could say space aliens. All right. We'll start there for a second. So instead of an intelligent God, we now have intelligent space aliens. But you see, we have another problem. Who created the space aliens? You see how this problem is just going to go on and on and on? You say, well, another space alien. Well, who created the other space alien? And the answer and the reply you usually receive, and I do talk to a lot of these atheists, so I know their answers already. Oh, well, okay. Then just because aliens didn't do it, well, that doesn't mean God did it. And then they'll say, well, who created God? And that's their answer? Huh. Well, I don't know. How do you know what God is? Okay. So if you're talking about something that transcends the natural universes, you're not using the laws of the natural universe to explain it. You're talking about something outside that universe, something bigger, something way more advanced than its creation. So what God is then, you say, well, why doesn't God just show himself? Well, if God is bigger than the universe and he created the universe, then everything you see explains exactly who he is. You see fundamental mathematical forces of nature like E and like pi and like phi. Some of them just simply demonstrate how dog, I wish you'd quit walking around in circles. You're driving me crazy. Now, some of them would just describe how that the universe functions with a path of least resistance. But think about what you're saying. If E is describing the path of least resistance and phi, which phi determines a spiral, the course of a spiral, and a spiral acts as a torus shape, whizzing itself as like a magnet, like magnetic rings around a magnet itself. That's represented by phi. The way the galaxies spiral, that's represented by phi. In fact, it seems to show the easiest path of the universe. Okay, the path of least resistance. So when we see that in nature, we would not assume that the forces of phi and the path of least resistance and lightning always, like electricity, always follows the path of least resistance. We cannot assume that the path of least resistance is creating something that requires that overcoming a lot of resistance. Because not only do I have to, for example, to make something intelligent out of this bottle, I have to pick it up, I have to think about it, I have to have a plan, and I have to put energy into it. I have to overcome least resistance to make anything useful out of it, especially when I combine it with a whole bunch of other things. And you know how many thousands of different elements and chemicals and tiny little subatomic pieces are in your body that all have to function and overcome the path of least resistance in order to work? So many of them. But all of our fundamental forces of nature show that they're doing just the opposite. They're following the path of least resistance. And here you are designed so that you can follow that path. All those pieces and chemicals in your body can follow that path so that they can live and work together. But you can't create anything following the path of least resistance. You can only expend energy through the path of least resistance. And that is observable science. You see, science is supposed to be about what you can observe and measure. Okay? Science isn't supposed to be, well, we can pretend that it happened a long time ago, far away in a universe that doesn't exist now because of universes we can't see, understand, or contemplate. And somehow that's supposed to be bigger than understanding God. Well, or understanding the existence of a creator, somehow that's supposed to be more scientific. It's absurdity is what it is. It's nonsense. Somebody told me yesterday, they said, well, you can't say that God created the earth and then use the earth as evidence of the creator. And of course, my reply was, so a painter can't use a painting and show the painting as proof that a painter painted it? Where do they come up with this sort of absurdity? Of course you can. Now, you can say, well, that doesn't show that the painter exists. Well, it shows that a painter exists somewhere. Maybe not the one you're thinking of, but there's one out there somewhere. And we can also see that God in nature all around us, who's organized, put together the impossible to create what you use every day. Millions and millions and millions of intelligently put together inanimate objects. At a microscopic level, if I could take a cell and blow it up to the size of this river, and you just looked at any individual little piece of it, you would see that by itself it's nothing. It has to have all the other parts. And even the pieces inside that one part will have other parts that don't work unless they were all put together at the same time. Millions of parts full of interrelated pieces. Oh, dog, walking around me, walking in circles. A good example of the evolutionary atheistic theory. There he goes again, walking in circles. That's what they do. They just walk in circles and walk around and poop on things and call it science. That's atheism. That's evolution for you. Thanks for watching.